Hi everyone. You are listening to For Those We Lost. I'm your host, Jennifer Sullivan. Thank you for being here. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. Or you can go to the website forthosewelostpodcast.com and click on the contact button and reach me that way as well. This show won't ever have a members area or episodes that you have to pay to listen to, but there are expenses to hosting a podcast. And if you'd like to help, you can support this show at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. In this show, people share their stories of losing a loved one to COVID. As the pandemic continues, many of us feel the weight of the world wanting to move on and the pain of our loss that holds us tight. For us, there is no avoiding the ever-present reminder that we lost a loved one to COVID. It is with us every day, everywhere. What you hear in each story is grief, sadness, and love. We will more than likely talk about the vaccine and maybe a little bit about politics, and you may not agree. But I hope you'll keep listening. I hope you'll stay to the end of each episode and realize that each person who openly shares here has experienced deep grief over the loss of a loved one. And that's something we will all experience. We all love someone, we will all lose someone we love, and we will all grieve. These are the stories of those we lost to COVID. Thanks for being here with me. I've got a wonderful show coming up for you. Today, I'll be talking to Allison in Maryland. Allison lost her parents to COVID in the summer of 2020. Her mom, Terry, passed away on July 30th, and her father, Kenneth, passed away just 5 days later on August 4th. Allison lives in Maryland, and her parents lived in South Carolina, dealing with the pandemic and their own health issues on their own. Allison talks about her grief and her regrets at how her parents died, but she's also coping by sharing her story with others through the Yellow Heart Memorial, and she was a volunteer at the In America Flags installation last fall in Washington, D.C. For context, we recorded this episode on January 7th, 2022. I've included information on the Yellow Heart Memorial and the In America Flags art installation in the show notes below. And with that, I'd like to welcome Allison to the show. Thank you for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
So you live in Maryland.
Yes.
And your parents lived in South Carolina.
That's right.
Okay. And you lost both of them within just a few days of each other in the summer of 2020.
Right. My mom died on July 30th, and then my dad died on August 4th.
So what I'd like to do is, I know your sister lives in Georgia. I'd like you to go back to March of 2020 and just talk for a little bit about how you first heard about COVID and your family's decisions at that time.
Well, I'm a teacher in a public school system. We live right outside of Washington, D.C., and our school system is really big. There's over 200 schools in the county. And so the first I heard of COVID was through my job because everybody was buzzing around about it. And then they brought like hand sanitizer into the classrooms and things like that. And they were making sure that we were asking the kids to wash their hands a lot. And then all of a sudden, on March 14th, I think was the date, my principal had a meeting with everybody and he said, so we're going to close school for next week and through spring break, which I think was the following week. And then he's like, we'll probably be back after that. You'll just get a longer spring break because everyone's worried about this virus that's going around. And then after that, we never went back, and it was very strange. And my family, my own personal family, I have a husband and two. Now my kids are out of the house, but at that point, my son was in high school, my daughter was in college. And we kind of just stayed home. I mean, we didn't 100% stay home at first, but we were being careful. We were washing our hands a lot, and we learned about the masks, and there were no real rules at the very beginning, but we were trying to be careful. And then my county pretty quickly made a mask mandate for places like grocery stores, and when you go into public places with other people, they wanted you to wear a mask. And so I have a photo from the very beginning of me and my son going to the grocery store with our masks, and we were kind of just playing around with it. We're like, we're going out like bandits to get groceries or whatever. So, but we took it as seriously as everyone made it seem, but we weren't super freaked out about it, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of the beginning, I guess.
Yeah. And did you talk to your parents at all about how you were feeling about it or what they were doing in South Carolina?
Yeah, because my mom and dad both had health conditions. They weren't really that old. They were both 73, and they lived alone in their house that I grew up in. And we had a healthcare service that came in to help with my dad because he was showing early signs of kind of mild to moderate dementia. And he was kind of difficult for my mom to make him take his medication and things like that. And my sister had called the company and asked, what their precautions were, and they basically just told her, well, we're doing whatever's required. And at that point it wasn't very much. And I was kind of worried about it because my parents, that they were older, and they did have some health issues. But it wasn't, because it was really difficult to get care in the home, we kind of just didn't push things with that company. And I encouraged my mom to make sure she was ordering her groceries instead of like going out and going to the grocery store. And she was sewing some masks. She was a very into sewing her whole life. And so I was like, well, maybe that's something you can do when you're stuck at home, is sew some masks and have somebody take them, donate them to the hospitals or whatever. So I think they were being relatively cautious. My mom and I would, send pictures back and forth and the phone, and she sent me a picture of her in her mask and her gloves, ready just to go pick up her groceries. Because also at that time, it was really hard to get groceries delivered because everyone was wanting to do that.
Yeah.
So she would order them online and then go pick them up. And so I know she was at least doing some things, but there were also no mask mandates, no rules about it in South Carolina at all. Um, and I was just trying to tell her, even if other people aren't doing it, you really need to do it just to keep yourself safe. And as far as I know, she was at least trying.
Yeah. Yeah. When was the last time that you saw your parents?
Well, that's also kind of a difficult story, was because my sister and I and my son went to visit them in it was for Memorial Day weekend, so in May, because the house had been having some water issues, and they had had a lot of rain at that point. And so my mom was really upset because um, they have a full downstairs. It's not really a basement, but it had like an inch of water in one of the rooms.
Oh,
And she
wow.
was like, I don't know what to do about this. I've been calling companies, and nobody can come out, and people are afraid of COVID, and there's nobody available to come check what's happening. And, she was really frustrated. And so my sister and I both tried to find some people that would come out and like assess the damage, and that was really difficult. So anyway, long story short, we went down to see with our own eyes what was going on, because we got some crazy estimates from two different companies who were actually willing to go in and try to assess what was going on. And my parents also didn't have tons of money to throw at a big problem like that. So that was another factor in all the stress of life at that time. But that was the last time we saw them. So it wasn't really a happy visit. it was like a problem-solving visit, and my parents had a lot of stuff in their house, and all that stuff had gotten wet, and so we had to, like, take a bunch of trips to get rid of stuff, and so I feel really sad because that was the last time we saw them, and it wasn't really for a good reason, and we weren't really having that much fun together. We were just trying, being really stressed and trying to figure out this problem and getting upset at each other for, stupid things. But
Yeah. Can I can I ask, did you notice, your dad's early dementia? Did that add to it, or was it just something that, you saw more when you were there?
definitely, we in the last year of their life, we definitely noticed anytime we would visit that my dad was much more grouchy, much more argumentative, kind of withdrawn. And he also had some physical symptoms, like he was incontinent. And then when we would try to like help him with that, he would argue about it. And he didn't want people helping him, but he clearly needed people helping him. And my mom just couldn't do it. So we definitely noticed. And there was just not a lot that we could do to make it a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah. I just asked because my mom had Alzheimer's, and she was very far gone as far as that goes at the end. She just I was a nice person who came to visit her, but it it's hard when you're trying to make memories and have good times or even take care of things that need to be taken care of, and it ends up being sort of a sad, grouchy, upsetting situation.
Yeah, the last happy time we were all together was the Christmas of 2019. My whole family went there. My sister came. My cousins still live in that town, and my aunt and uncle, and so we were all together. So that's the time that I try to remember, not the time the basement flooded and all that stuff,
Yeah.
because we did have some good times there. And my dad was involved as much as he could be. And my son actually just yesterday or the day before found, kids do all this crazy social media stuff. And so he found a video from his Snapchat that had that he had posted from that Christmas with we were all like singing with this silly karaoke mic, and my dad's in the corner sitting in a chair, but my son's name is Logan, and he got a video of my dad in the background just kind of watching all the chaos go on, and he's got this little funny grin on his face. So that was a really fun, happy thing for my son that just shared that with me like 2 days ago. So
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like it can, um, ease ease, something and bring you some comfort. I don't know, I like to look back at some videos and pictures from earlier, before everything
yeah.
happened.
Yeah, I kind of sometimes get desperate in that mode, and I don't actually have a lot of, especially in recent history, video footage of my parents, and that makes me really sad. Like, I have it from when my kids were babies and the grandparents would come and we would do little things because we're videoing the little kids doing all their little kid things.
Yeah.
And then the grandparents are there or whatever. And so I have that kind of stuff, but I don't really have a lot that's in the last like 5 or even maybe 10 years that's, stuff that my parents would say or things they would do. So to
Mhm.
me, those things are very important. And sometimes I feel like I focus too much on trying to find them and replay them or re-listen to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I do that too. I have some voicemails that I saved, and I'm glad I saved them, but sometimes I can just listen to them over and over again. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, why don't you go forward to July or June when it started in 2020 and your parents first realized they had COVID and what happened?
So my mom, I noticed it by talking on the phone with my mom in July, probably right after July 5th. So that maybe that second week of July. She just when she was talking to me, she had this like little cough in the background, and I was like, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" She goes, "Oh, I think I just have allergies." And I'm like, "But you take allergy medicine." I don't, my mom and dad both took a lot of medications for a lot of things. And she just was on basically allergy medication from the spring till the winter, which in South Carolina, there's not a very long winter. So almost
Yeah.
year round, she took allergy medicine anyway. So I was like, "Mom, I'm not really sure that's allergies," but we let it go for a few more days. And then um, she was coughing even more a few days later. And I was like, "Mom, that cough is really bothering me." And she goes, "Yeah, I think it's getting a little worse. I don't know what it is." And I was like, "Well, I want you to go get a COVID test because that's like one of the main symptoms of COVID is that you have this cough that just you can't really identify and it's not that bad." And so she was like, "Okay, maybe I should go. But I don't know how to find a test." And my mom was pretty savvy with technology, but not 100% like a lot of people's parents. She would call my son a lot and say, "How do you do this?" or "How do I find that?" She goes, "I don't know how to find an appointment." And I was like, "Don't worry, I'll find one for you." So I went, and it was really hard to find an appointment for a COVID test in their area at that time. They were all booked, and I finally found a place that was like one of the drive-through COVID testing places on us on the a Saturday that was whatever. I don't remember what day of the week it was that we were talking, but it was like 2 days later. So I was like, "So I can try to make you an appointment at a CVS, but it'll be like several days out. But there's this place at the high school on Saturday, and you just go and get a line, and they'll test you in the car." I said, "I think that's your best bet because it's just 2 days away." And she's like, "Okay, I'll do that." And the testing was supposed to be from something like 8 till noon. And so they went really early. They got in line in their car at 7:30, and it basically took 3 hours of waiting in the car, and it was really hot. And she took my dad with her, and that was the first that I even knew my dad had symptoms. She never told me or my sister that my dad was coughing. And when she finally called me from the car, she's like, "Okay, we just got our test. We waited forever and we're really hot and we're really cranky." And I was like, "You both went?" I was like, "I didn't know dad was coughing." And she's like, "Oh, yeah, he was. So we just both got the test."
Oh.
So that's actually how I found out that my dad was also um, probably had it. But
Mhm. And so when did they get the results?
I think they got the results probably 2 days after that. It wasn't immediate, but it wasn't like a 5-day wait. And so then I was like, "Well, crap."
Yeah.
Because at the very beginning, my sister and my husband and my sister is divorced, and so it's really the three of us that kind of work together to help my parents make decisions.
Mhm.
And we all said when all of the COVID things started that if my dad got COVID, he wouldn't survive because my dad was really, really not a healthy person.
Mhm.
And so when it was positive, I was like, "Well, crap, that's bad." And yeah. So that's where our minds went. We were like, "Well, I guess this is the beginning of the end." And it was all, we were all depressed. But then we also had to like figure out what to do because based on where I lived, it was all like you don't interact with people, right? We were all
Yeah.
basically staying with our own selves, and we were doing Zoom calls with our friends, and we weren't seeing people in each other's houses. And my sister in Atlanta they didn't have quite as strict rules, but they did have some rules. And so neither one of us wanted to go and like help my parents with this COVID thing because we didn't want to put ourselves and our families at risk.
Yeah.
So, and once we told the little healthcare company that was coming to help a few times a week that they were positive, they're like, "Okay, we can't come until they, are done being sick, and then we'll come back."
Oh.
So they were kind of like up a creek without a paddle or whatever, and we were really stressed about what to do at that point to try to because my mom, even in her best days, wasn't able to take care of my dad and everything that he needed.
Mhm.
So now she's sick and he's sick, and yeah.
Yeah. That had to be so hard to be so far away from them too.
Yes. And we thought about all kinds of, like, what can we do? Can we go down there and stay in a hotel? Can we go down there and try to safely stay with my cousin and do stuff so we're at least in the same vicinity? Um, but I think we ultimately decided that it wasn't really going to be that much help if we weren't really going to go to the house and be in the house. So we just still tried to do everything over the phone, over the internet, do all this looking for some way to help them.
Yeah. Do you know where they got COVID from? Did your mom or dad ever tell you any thoughts on where they might have gotten it from?
My mom's pretty sure that they got it from a restaurant a few days before the 4th of July. She said they had been to a doctor's appointment with my dad, and he was really cranky and hungry, and my dad wasn't allowed to drive anymore, so my mom drove him to all his doctor's appointments, and he had a lot of them.
Mhm.
But, after this one particular doctor's appointment, he was like, "I'm hungry, I need food, I need it now, I need whatever." And he loved, like, junk fast food, and so there was a little diner, hole in the wall hamburger place that was on the way back from where the doctor was, and so he's like, "We need to stop at the Big Clock and get me a burger and some fries and a Coke," and so my mom was like, "All right, all right, all right." So they stopped, and instead of just getting it through the drive-through and taking it home, they went inside and sat down, and they, got their senior dinner. And then when it was all said and done, I found the receipt for that meal in my mom's car after they passed away, and my sister and my husband and I had to clean out the house and sell the house and do the same with the cars. I found the receipt for that meal in the backseat of my mom's car, and I was just like, "Oh my god, this is like what killed them."
Mhm.
Going to this stupid restaurant, and the bill was like 18.95. It was less than $20 for their, like, meal that led to their demise. I mean, I have a very negative outlook on it, so when I say things like that, my son is like, "Mom, why are you talking like that?" I'm like, "Because it's true." Like, that's just the way my mind works. But
Yeah.
my mom had told me on the phone, she goes, "I think that's where we got it because nobody in the restaurant was wearing masks. They had all the things out on the table. The menus were real menus. They weren't QR codes, and they had the forks and the silverware, not disposable, and they had the salt and the pepper." And she's like, "I'm sure that's where we got it." And my mom is very matter of fact, and she's also a very positive person. So she never, ever, ever wanted to, like, blame anybody for anything most of the time.
Mhm.
So she was like, "Yeah, well, we can't do anything about it."
Yeah.
Which is true.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate that, like in your dad's case, you said he had a lot of medical appointments, and in the pandemic during COVID, they have to go in, they have to be seen. It's like just getting medical care is also putting them at risk.
Right. Right. And we were in the process of trying to get my dad, get a place for him, like an assisted living place or something like that. And that was one of the doctor's appointments that he went to right before that, because I was on a conference call with them at that appointment, was to talk to the doctor with my mom and my dad in the same room. And the doctor was having a very frank conversation, like, "I think it's time that you need more help than you can get at your house. And so I think what your family and what I think we need to do is start searching for an alternative place for you to live where you can get more help on a daily basis." And so we had kind of already put that thought in his head and started that process. But then with COVID, like, that's what the doctor had said, was like, there's not really going to be anything able to happen for at least 6 months,
Yeah.
but we can start, giving you ideas of places to call. And they do some virtual, meetings with you and stuff like that. So
Yeah. And so what did your parents end up doing after they got COVID?
They just stayed home, and my sister and I, after a day or 2 of just staying home, after the healthcare people quit, that were helping my dad, my mom was calling us or texting us. She was like, "I can't do this. I can't keep up with everything. I'm feeling worse. I have no energy. Your dad this, your dad that." And so we were really struggling to figure out how to help them. They went probably 3 days with, maybe longer than that, with nobody helping them. And finally, we had hired, a while back, just because we were far away, and my dad was needing more and more support and like help with connecting with different services. We had hired a geriatric care manager company. And so we reached out to this woman and we were like, "Do you know anything about people in the area that will go and like take care of people who have COVID?" Because every place we were calling that we just like looked up on the internet or whatever, they were like, "We don't do that. We don't do that. Nobody's going into the house of people who have COVID. Like, you must be crazy, lady." But so we put this woman on it, trying to help us find a place, and she actually did amazing job. Like, within 24 hours she had us two phone numbers, only two, of places in the area that she knew would do it. And so I spent, because it was summer and I was more available to do things like that because I don't teach in the summer, although that summer I was teaching a 1 hour Zoom summer class. But anyway, I made some calls, and one of the companies was like, "We don't have any availability. We don't have any people to do this." And then sorry, that's my dog. The other one, was based in Arizona. And the lady that I spoke to, she's like, "Okay, I'm going to have to call that area and then I'll get back to you, but I think we can handle it." And she finally called me back and she was like, "We have a person. I'm going to give you her phone number." She's like, "I really understand that this is a big need and a big issue right now." But so I called that person and she was like, "Okay, I think I have somebody I can send out to the house tomorrow at 8 in the morning." And then that fell through for whatever reason, I don't know.
Mhm.
And she called me back, the local person called me back, and she was like, "I'm sorry, that isn't going to work. I'm working really hard to find someone else. If I can't find someone else, I'm going to go out there myself." And she was like the manager, the local manager of this company. I can't remember the name of it, but they were amazing. And
Mhm.
so the manager woman actually went out to the house that evening, and she kind of like assessed what was going on. And then she called me. She goes, "Miss Lever, this is way worse than what you think." Like, she's like, "The house is a mess. Your mom can't get to the bathroom." My mom was having diarrhea issues and vomiting, and my dad was kind of just like laying in the bed. I felt so bad based on what she told me over the phone. And I just started crying. She goes, "No, no, no, don't worry. We are going to take care of it." She goes, "We're going to get somebody in here." She's like, "I stayed there for a couple of hours. I cleaned up the best I could. I got everybody something to drink. I tried to see if anybody wanted to eat. I made sure your dad took his medicine." She goes, "And, I got everybody settled for the night and they seem like they're okay. And I'm going to send somebody out first thing in the morning." And so then after that, we had somebody there 8 hours a day for probably 14 or 15 days. I don't know. I can't remember the timeline all that well all the time. But then they cleaned up the house and were trying to monitor my dad, and my mom at that point seemed okay. She just had no energy and she was having all the COVID symptoms. So, yeah, that was rough.
Yeah, I mean, how amazing that you were able to find somebody to come in and then someone who spent so many days with your parents. That had to be so comforting to you.
Yeah, it was, I wish I could like call. There was a group of it was a group of three different women because nobody could do it all the time.
Mhm.
So there was the manager woman, her name was Shawana, and she would let me text her all the time. She goes, "Just text me anything you need. I will make sure these ladies get it get the information. And then the other two women that were trading off actually going out to the house, they were also wonderful. And my mom loved them. And they basically did everything. I mean, it was very expensive. And I feel like we were very lucky to have found them and been able to afford to pay them, because I know that a lot of people couldn't do that.
Yeah. And so your mom and dad, it sounds like they were down for a couple of weeks at least.
Yeah, so they were July 11th is the day they got their tests done.
Mhm.
And then on the 20th or the 21st, well, the healthcare person and my mom wanted my dad to go to the hospital, I think on the 18th, because he was very lethargic and not moving very much. And the woman who was trying to take care of them, she could only just get him to kind of sit up in bed a little bit and drink a little bit of water. She couldn't really make him do anything. And so she was like, I really think we need to call the ambulance. But then when they called the ambulance, my dad was lucid enough to tell them that he didn't want to go with them. And so they kind of like assessed him quickly and decided that he could stay.
Yeah.
I was really annoyed that that is what happened. But
Yeah, I can understand that.
I guess what they told my mom and the health assistant that was there was, if he really refuses to go, they can't take him against his will.
Mhm.
So he stayed another 2 days until I called his primary care doctor, and I told him, I was like, look, this is crazy. My dad is refusing to go to the hospital. He's doing terribly. My mom can't help him. My dad was a really big man too. He weighed over 300 pounds. And this healthcare woman can only do so much, right?
Mhm.
She's an average sized person. She can't lift a 300-pound man and like make him do anything. So I talked to the doctor and I was like, you really have to do something so that he goes to the hospital. He can't continue to stay at home. This isn't working. So they did a virtual visit with my dad, and the doctor was like, so after we hang up, they are calling the ambulance. They are coming to get you, and you are going to get in the ambulance and go to the hospital. Otherwise, this isn't going to work. And somehow my dad agreed with this doctor. And so they called the ambulance and took him to the hospital. And he never left the hospital, but he stayed in the hospital probably another 2 to 3 weeks.
Mhm.
But at least he wasn't in the house, stressing my mom out even more.
Yeah. Did the care, people continue to come to the house and check on your mom?
Yeah, we kept paying them to come because my mom was still very weak and not really able to do a lot for herself. And she she was doing okay for probably another week after my dad went to the hospital. And then she had the added, worry about trying to call the hospital and check in on him and find out the updates and all that stuff. Um, so she stayed able to deal with that for a while. And then I think it also was too much stress for her, because finally she ended up, and also the virus was progressing, I'm sure. She ended up with like having chest pains and trouble breathing. And so the healthcare aide took her to the urgent care on the advice of her primary care doctor. And the urgent care did a chest x-ray, and they said, yeah, we see whatever they were called, like the COVID crystals or something.
Mm, mhm.
Um, the evidence of COVID in your lungs, but you don't have pneumonia at this point. So they basically gave my mom an inhaler and told her to go back home, get some more rest, and use the inhaler if she really felt like she couldn't breathe. And so she did that, and that seemed to help her for maybe 24 hours. And then the next day, she was feeling a little bit worse. So they went back to the urgent care, um, and they were basically told, well, you're still not bad enough to go to the hospital. And at that point, I think the hospitals were overrun anyway
Yeah.
in their area. So they sent her back home, and yeah, then we several of us talked to her that night, and she seemed actually better. Like, so many people tell me now that she's gone that, "I talked to your mom the night before she died, and she sounded better." And I was like, "I talked to her, like, at 9 o'clock the night before she died, and she did sound better."
Hmm.
But then something happened, and, like, 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning, she called 911 because nobody was staying overnight with her. Those women were just coming to help her during the daytime. And the EMT people, they revived her. She went into cardiac arrest and they revived her, and then she went into cardiac arrest again and they couldn't get her back. So that was, she died in that house all by herself, and she had to call 911 herself. So that part really makes me sad
Yeah.
that that's how it happened. And one of her neighbors, after the fact, told me that she saw it all happening through her window. She's like, it was the worst thing, because she was really good friends with my mom, the next door neighbor was. And she goes, it was the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, these people coming in all suited up like that, like in a movie, and going into your house and coming out with your mom with, like, the blanket over her. And she's like,
Yeah.
I knew what had happened at that point. And I just stood in my window and I cried the whole, like, scene.
Yeah. Because really, everybody, even though you lived so close to each other, you were so isolated. It's like
Right.
she might as well have been a world away.
Right.
Yeah. And so how did your dad find out, and how did you get the news to him about your mom?
Well, I guess because my dad was still alive, even though he was in the hospital, the my parents live in a really small town, and so the fire company that came to help with my mom were also basically the same people that had taken my dad to the hospital. So they knew my dad was in the hospital, and they told the police chief, "Look, Mr. Bridwell's in the hospital with COVID also, so you have to go there and tell him, or you can tell his daughters." And I guess because my dad was technically the next of kin, the police chief went to the hospital and told my dad, and the nurses and doctors there tried to help make sure he understood what the police chief was saying. And then my sister, because she lived closer, she could have gotten to them in like 2 hours, whereas for me it would have taken me a whole day to drive there. My sister was the next point of contact on their list of people to call. So they called my sister and said, we just told your dad, but your mom passed away. And then my
Oh,
sister, because my dad, when he was in the hospital, he couldn't talk. He had kind of lost the ability to talk when he was still at home, which was one of the reasons they were so concerned about him and wanted him to go to the hospital, was because he was kind of semi unresponsive, at least verbally. So yeah, so the police chief called my sister at like 6 in the morning and told her, and then she called me as I was getting ready to teach my little online summer class. And it was like the worst phone call I've ever gotten in my life. I just started screaming, and my husband and my son were still in the bed asleep, like, and then they just came out of their room like, what is happening? And I was just like screaming at the top of my lungs. It was terrible. Because we never expected, not that we never expected, but we expect kind of, when this all started, we kind of expected my dad wouldn't make it, but we did not expect that, first of all, that my mom wouldn't really make it, but definitely not that my mom would die before my dad, and that it would all happen that way.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking, is if anything, your family was prepared for your dad's passing, not your mom.
Right. Yes. We kind of were. And also because my dad had been so unhealthy for so many years, he had had a few other close calls in the last, I guess, 3 to 4 years with, he had to have open heart surgery and a quadruple bypass and all these things. And never died. And so we were like, okay, this is going to finally be it. I mean, that's kind of like a crude way to think about it, but that's just how we were thinking. Like, we were like, okay, well, this thing will probably finally be the end. But
Yeah.
we never really thought that that's what was going to happen. That
Yeah.
my mom would go first, and then my dad would still be in the hospital and not really able to. I don't know how he was able to process it because he wasn't able to talk anymore at all.
Mhm.
So
Did you see him or have any, even though he couldn't talk, any time to FaceTime him or have a video call?
after we got the news about my mom, I had to let my daughter know because she was not with us. She was working a summer job at the beach. So I had to call her and I had to let the family know. And then we called the hospital, and the nurses there said, well, we can put you on a FaceTime call with your dad, but he's not going to talk, but you can talk to him. So me and my husband and my son did that, and we were just crying. Like, we were like, and my dad just was like looking at us through the computer screen, and he just looked so sad and terrified. He wasn't crying, but he was definitely looking at us. So I think he heard us and saw us. Yeah, it was really sad and heart-wrenching that we couldn't be with him and that it had to turn out this way. And yeah, my mom did everything for my dad, basically their whole married life, but especially the last several years of his life, she did everything. So
Yeah. Yeah, in a way, that's kind of a generational thing, I think, for people that age.
yeah.
So, your dad passed away a few days later. I think you said 5, right? So, if you wouldn't mind just talking about that for a little bit.
So after my mom passed away, we knew we had to go down to South Carolina, and there was so many things, right? Like,
Mhm.
there was the house, and there was my dad, and there was, a funeral that we had to like figure out what to do for, and there was just everything. I don't even know, like, when somebody dies and you're not expecting it, like, I don't even know what to do when somebody dies. Neither did my sister and neither did my husband. So we were kind of desperate and to try to figure out what to do first and what things needed to be done. And my sister had a really good friend. Sorry, I'm going to start crying.
It's okay.
My sister's really good friend, Suzanne, got on the phone with us on a conference call, and she was like, okay, I'm going to call this place. I'm going to call this funeral home. I'm going to call these places. I'm going to get information from them. You guys don't have to do any of it. I'm going to write everything down, and I'm going to call you back, and we're going to figure this out. So, and that was like the biggest help ever, was having somebody else to just have a clear head for thinking and know where to start. And so my sister and I kind of gave her some ideas of things that we still knew about in the town. And she just called around and got all the information from like what they offer during COVID to how much things cost to, you know, where their locations were and all of that. And like I think I said earlier, my parents didn't have a lot of money. And so we were trying to figure out how to pay for all of this as well, which was extremely stressful because my husband and I had 2 kids in college, or 2 kids about to be in college. My sister's a single mom, and my parents had a lot of debt and not a lot of money. So that was also a factor in the things she was trying to find out. But it was really a lifesaver. So she kind of called about 6 places and gave us the information back. And then we just decided what we were going to do about the funeral and what we were going to do about the burial. My parents already had a place to be buried that they had paid for. So that was helpful. And we were able to find that information. But then we still had to do like, well, what do you do for a funeral for COVID? And these people just, died from COVID. And, you know, so anyway, Suzanne was doing that just for my mom initially.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided on a place, and then we decided we were going to go down to South Carolina. But my husband and I were really reluctant to go into the house because there had been, people there with COVID for weeks.
Yeah.
And so then she also did some research on places that would clean the house so that we could go in there and not feel like we were going to get sick by going into the house. And that was really expensive. It was like $1,200 or $1,500 to have the house cleaned. Um, but we just said we have to do it. Otherwise, we're going to drive ourselves crazy that we're getting sick by being in the house. And we went, and that was the saddest thing ever, was walking into that house after my mom had died. There was even flowers sitting on the porch from my husband's father and wife. They had sent flowers to my mom, and they didn't even make it in the house before she died.
Oh.
But they were still sitting on the porch because nobody had been there in like the 3 days or whatever since they had been delivered. And my sister and I were allowed to go visit my dad. We had to put on all the crazy gear, a mask, a face shield, a gown, gloves. And they said, we don't let visitors in, but you can go visit him for 15 minutes. And we did that for, I think, 3 days that we were there trying to figure out what to do with the house, trying to deal with my mom's funeral, and going to visit my dad once a day for those 3 days. And then on the last day that we visited, the doctor told us, your dad has many health conditions, and they're getting worse. Like, he was having kidney failure. He had diabetes anyway, and that was kind of completely out of control. Um, and he wasn't able to talk, and he wasn't able to eat. They had him on IV fluids, and his oxygen for some reason seemed kind of okay. They didn't ever intubate him like they did a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But the doctor was like, your dad doesn't necessarily have a DNR order, but he has all of these conditions, and this is what it's looking like, and this is the prognosis with COVID patients. He's probably not going to survive more than 24 or maybe 48 hours. So he was very frank with us, and I appreciated it. And I think my sister and I both kind of expected that conversation
Mm-hmm.
because we knew that my dad wasn't a healthy person in the first place. And we knew enough about COVID at that point to know, like, it's kind of a death sentence for a person like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, we sat in the hospital waiting room. We were really the only people there because they weren't letting people in, and talked with the doctor. And that's what he told us. And we were like, okay. And it was really weird. Like, so we walked out of the hospital that day. I guess that was the 3rd of August. And we went back and we tried to figure out what we were doing with dinner and stupid things. And then the next day, we were like, well, I guess we should go back and visit dad. And we went. This is the weirdest thing that I still remember very vividly because it's completely related to COVID, but it's also completely surreal because I guess it's some weird coping thing. But my sister's friend had said, oh, at the Walmart by your parents' house, they have Clorox wipes. I just went there. If you want to go buy them, she's like, you can buy a set of 3. And at that point, all these cleaning supplies were not available,
Mm-hmm.
period.
Yeah.
And so that's what my sister and I got in the car that morning to do. On the morning that my dad died, we were like, okay, let's go to Walmart and get some Clorox wipes um, to take back home with us whenever we go back home. And so that's what we did. And then while we were driving to Walmart, the phone rang, and it was the doctor saying that my dad had passed. And we both were in the car together. And so we talked to him on speakerphone. And we were just like, okay. I mean, I don't know what you say when somebody tells you that happened. We didn't really cry. We didn't really, it was so different from when my mom died. When I got the news that my mom died, it was just more like we were expecting it and we were prepared for it, and it was sad, but it was just like, okay. And then talked to my sister about this like a few weeks later. I was like, and then we just went into Walmart and bought our stupid Clorox wipes. That's what we did. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just what we did. We were like, okay, here we are. We're sitting in the parking lot. We're just gonna go in. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Grief
so
brain.
strange, so strange. And I don't know why that's what we did next. But anyway,
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So, and you had this person, sorry, and you had this person who was helping you with your mom. So then it just became about, did it become about a funeral for your mom and your dad?
yeah, that's what we just, it had only been a few days and we hadn't really finalized anything with the funeral company. So then we had to go back and meet with the funeral director at the funeral home. We had to pick out caskets. We had to do all of that like
Hmm.
horrible things, but we had to do it for two people. And then we had to like the funeral director was asking us, so where are the bodies? And I was like, I don't know. I didn't see either of my parents after they died. I was like, I don't know where the bodies are. I guess my dad is at the hospital and my mom is at the morgue. I don't know the answer to that question. But that is where they were, and he was like, okay, well, we'll have to go and like pick them up. And yeah, it was so weird. All
Yeah.
of that, and then doing it for two people, and then trying to plan a funeral that was COVID safe. My mom had tons of friends, and they went to a really big Southern Baptist church. And so everybody, because of the nature of how things were in South Carolina, people were still going to church and um, you know, being together in big crowds inside of buildings. And my sister and I are like, well, that's not what we're doing.
Yeah, of course.
And so a lot of people were kind of mad at us because we wouldn't do it at the church. And then we did it at the grave and we limited it to 50 people. And the woman at the cemetery, she was like, well, technically you have a 50-person limit, but we're on private property, so you can have as many people as you want. And we just kind of looked at her like, what? Anyway,
Yeah.
she was implying that we could invite the whole church and just come there,
Yeah.
but that's not how we wanted to do it. And we didn't think that was smart or safe or any of that. So we did make like an invitation to the funeral and we let people know through Facebook Messenger and a few people through text message that don't do that social media kind of thing. And we just had to write on there, unfortunately, because of COVID and the way that our parents passed. We don't feel comfortable having everyone there. We will have a celebration of life at another point in time where everyone can be there. And a lot of people sent us kind of either questioning texts and messages, or a few people were really mad and upset that they weren't included. And that part was really just added to the stress.
Hmm.
But somehow we got through it and I think we did as best we could, a nice little graveside service. My mom loved flowers, and so we picked out really beautiful flowers. Yellow roses were her favorite, and so we had a lot of yellow roses. And we had um, our friends that came to the funeral bring a flower that they thought reminded them of either my mom or dad or both of them. And so that was a really nice aspect to it, was to have everyone bring a flower and then they laid it on the grave instead of having like a big receiving line where there's all people hugging and whatever. They just came by one at a time and like shared their little thought on their memory of my parents with me and my sister and my kids and my husband and my nephew. So that was kind of nice instead of like, some big crowded thing. At least it was nice for us. I don't know how other people perceived it. Other people probably thought we were weird and being, going against tradition and whatever. But so I think my mom would have liked it. My mom really loved pretty flowers. And so,
Yeah. Yeah, that's all you can do. I held a memorial service for my mom last summer in 2021, about a year after she passed away, and my aunts and uncles, her brothers and sisters, all said, "Your mom would have loved this." And that really meant a lot to me, that even though it was a year later, that they felt like my mom would have loved it.
yeah.
Yeah.
We did do a celebration of life this past August, which was a little more than a year after they passed at their church. It was still, COVID was still around. And so we did still do it outside. But we released a bunch of balloons and we had everybody like share their memories. And so that was nice too.
Yeah, I can imagine that it was. It did feel really good for me to have that memorial for my mom. It was like this closure that I didn't get
Yeah.
when she passed away. So I want to ask some questions about. I'm wiping my nose while I'm trying to talk to you. Some questions about how you're doing now. It's been a year, so there's always that talk of like the first year's the hardest, which now that I'm in year two, I don't really believe. But what would you describe your feelings as? Are you angry? Are you coping differently? How are you doing now?
I think I'm less angry. At first, I was very angry at the lack of restrictions in my parents' area that could have potentially saved them. I had a lot of anger towards people who thought that those lack of restrictions was a good thing. Even family members and friends. I was really mad at them for a long time. So I'm less angry. I'm still really sad. I have a hard time not, you know, wishing that this never happened or thinking about how it would be if it had never happened. And I do have a lot of guilt that I didn't do enough to help my parents when all of this started. I always rethink, well, what if I had had them come live with me and stay with me when we had all this initiated, and then I could have been in charge of like making sure they didn't go anywhere and making sure people didn't come into the house and things like that. um so I still feel that way. I still get sad because my mom and I and my sister had plans for when eventually we got my dad sort of taken care of, so that other people could do more of the work than my mom was doing. Like if he was in an assisted living place or something like that, that my mom would come and be able to spend more time with me and my sister and our families, for a few months at a time. She could, live with me. We have a spare bedroom. She likes my dog. She could, hang out with my kids. And then, the same thing with my sister. Her son is younger, but he's a lot of fun. And so I really, really am sad that we never got to do that. And also, my mom had dreams of traveling and going to different places. And my dad, number one, didn't really like doing that as much. And number two, it was really difficult for him to go places. Um, and so we would always say, well, mom, when we get dad taken care of, we're going to take you and we'll go on a cruise. She wanted to go on an Alaskan cruise.
Oh
And so
yeah.
we'll go on that cruise or we'll, go to the islands and, so all of that, it just boom, it's never going to happen. So I get really sad about that. And I've met with some other people who have lost loved ones to COVID through the Yellow Heart Memorial. I don't know if you've talked to people from that group,
I
but
have.
I really, really appreciate time to talk with other people who've gone through the same thing. and it's very validating. None of us really knows what to do or exactly how to process it, but at least we support each other and we try to make sure that our family members and loved ones' memories lived on. That's really important to me, is that people don't forget, you know? I don't wanna forget any of it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
It is hard because the numbers, it's just a number to a lot of people.
it is. And I was really involved with In America flags that were
Oh,
here in Washington, DC. I met the artist, and she doesn't actually live that far from me. I live right outside of Washington, DC in Maryland, so and I did a lot of volunteering with that, and I met so many just random people from all over the world, really, who had lost loved ones to COVID, and everyone just wants their loved ones not to be forgotten and to kind of share the story. That's like, why I appreciate being able to talk with you here. I just want people to know that my parents were great people, and it really sucks how they died and how suddenly they died. And there's so many people with so many stories.
yeah, and it helps to listen to other people, and it helps to share, and it helps to know that other people that you're talking to are they know how you feel and what you went through to a degree, and they'll be gentle, because
Right.
there's a lack of gentleness and a lack of kindness in a lot of the things that are said, right now.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And people who also say, well, my mom died and, whatever. It's just, I don't know. I feel like I would probably feel this way if my parents got hit by a car suddenly or something. It's different than if somebody's like terminally ill and you kind of prepare yourself a little bit at
Mhm.
a time. And I think it's even worse when it's this situation that we haven't ever experienced before, when so many people are dying.
Yeah. Yeah, if your dad had died at another time, you would have been able to be there in the hospital probably as much as you wanted at the end. You and your sister and your mom, without being limited to this 15 minutes and the PPE and all these things that hinder just being there for somebody, and physical touch, and being there in the way that they need at the end. And it's critical.
Right. And that's what I have the most guilt about. My mom died all by herself in her house alone, still trying to take care of herself.
Mhm.
But she was a caregiver, and she was a very caring person. And, I know that she would have rather it been that way than the other way around, where she was in the hospital and my dad was at home alone.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's the thing that weighs on me the most heavy, is that my mom died in the middle of the night in a COVID nursing home all by herself.
yeah.
It's hard. It's like the hardest thing, and if I think about it too much, my brain just spins out of control. It's really difficult.
Yeah, I still have these bouts where I just start thinking about it, I just start crying, and I can't, like, make myself stop.
Yeah,
Like, that's my daily routine helps me a lot, and when I don't have my daily routine, I kinda get stuck in thinking
yeah,
about how it should have been and how it could have been, and
yeah. So the flags, the in America flags, so you met people, did you write any flags out? Did you show people around?
Yes, I worked there probably 3 or 4 different days, and I
Oh,
met so many people, and I helped them fill out their flags and understand the purpose. And, some of them shared their stories, and some of them were very, just, "I just want to know the information and walk away." But that's kind of the more therapeutic things that help me, is talking to other people about their experience. And I also had friends, um, from my Facebook world that were, like, not able to come to Washington, DC, that I wrote flags for them and sent them pictures of them. And so that's also been kind of, another kind of therapeutic way to share with other people who've experienced something similar.
Mhm. Yeah, I watched an interview with Suzanne Furstenberg, that's her name, the
Yeah.
artist who did the installation, and one of the things that she talked about was the stories and how the volunteers who work there collected the stories and talked to people about their stories and let her know so that every flag had like this story behind it, that she made sure to, at least that's what she said, that she was cataloging those stories and saving those flags, and I really hope that they get put up again someday so that I can go.
Yeah, I think she is a very creative person, and she is saving them all, and she those of us who actually went there and helped, she sends us an email every couple of months kind of updating us on what she's doing. And right now she is still trying to catalog any stories that any of the volunteers heard about particular people,
Yeah,
because she wants to, she's also working with the Smithsonian Museum to try to figure out what to do next. It's
yeah.
such a huge exhibit though. I don't know
Mhm.
where it could ever be housed because it was immense when it was on the National Mall for those 3 weeks. I
Yeah,
I couldn't believe how much space it covered.
yeah. Yeah, that I've only seen it in pictures. I've heard that. I think it's incredibly comforting to know that she cares enough about every individual story to take the time to do that. I find an immense amount of comfort in that. And just knowing, like, I've seen the Vietnam Memorial and I want to go to the 9/11 Memorial someday, but knowing how big those are to me, and then the idea of 800, more than 800,000 names and stories. I don't know how you could ever have that in one place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're all hoping for through
Mhm.
the Yellow Heart Memorial people that I've met and through Suzanne and her work, and I'm sure there's other people.
Yep.
That's really what, you know, a lot of us want is something on that scale that
Mhm.
will, be forever so that people don't forget. And like, 20 years in the future when it's a distant memory, hopefully, the kids can come and say like, this was my great grandmother and whatever. I don't know why it's so important, but I feel like it's a national tragedy, and so I think, those of us who have suffered from it kinda deserve it, you
Yeah,
know?
I do. I do. So one last question I want to ask you, and I ask this as of everybody, is what do you say to people who tell you that COVID isn't real?
I'm very blunt. I'm kind of a blunt person anyway, which kinda gets me in trouble sometimes, but I say, "Well, COVID's real and my parents are dead because of it, and if you want to know more, you can talk to me about it." I don't really have time to argue with people because I've tried that in the past, and people who think the way they're gonna think, it's really hard to change their mind, at least in my experience, and maybe it's my tactics. My husband's a very, much a peacemaker, and he would be like, "Well, it's your way you're talking to people. People don't wanna listen to you when you talk to them that way." And I do in my mind, I know that, but also I'm like, "But my parents are dead."
Mhm.
And these people, I don't understand why they don't think that that matters. So I don't have a lot of time or really compassion most of the time for people who say COVID's not real. And luckily or unluckily, I don't know. I think it's lucky because I don't have to deal with it that much. Where I live,
Mhm.
there's not a lot of that sentiment going on. Most people where I live take it seriously. We still have a lot of rules. We have masks in schools. We have, mask mandates, even in grocery stores, still or again or whatever, right? I feel like I live in a relatively COVID safe area as much as that's possible.
Yeah.
And also, with the things people say about it, um, there's not a lot of that going on. So
Yeah.
for me, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
When I go other places, I just try to, bide my time and not make waves and do what I know is right. And I try to follow my husband's example of leading by example. That's what he prefers to do. He's like, well, you wear your mask, you stay in the places that are safe, and that's how you get people to come to your side. I don't know if I really believe that, but
Yeah. The only alternative really is that COVID comes to them and then they find out. And you don't want that either. I don't want that either.
right. I do not. But I have been, especially recently, reading on mostly Facebook, people that I grew up with in South Carolina that are all extremely ill now because of all these reasons, right? They either didn't take it seriously, or they didn't get the vaccine, or they didn't whatever, and now they're really sick. And I
Yeah.
I do feel bad for them.
Hmm.
I do not wish it on anyone, even my worst enemy. But there's this piece of my brain that says, "Well, why were you being so stupid?"
Yeah, I've a lot of people I know have experienced COVID in the last couple of months or are right now. I think that's part of the nature of what's happening right now with the virus, but also it's there's a lot of the push to go back to normal or move on or something, and I just don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't see it happening, not
Mhm.
anytime soon. And then the more you try to make it normal,
Mhm.
the more people get sick.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know.
yeah, I agree. Well, Allison, if you would say your parents' names.
So my mom is Terry Bridwell and my dad was Kenneth Bridwell.
Mhm. Thank you. I find there's something really helpful in just saying their names out loud because most of the time we just say mom or mom and dad, but their names
Yeah,
their names are powerful.
Ken and Terry is what they went by most of their lives. So, and they were high school sweethearts. I didn't mention that, but I should have. They met each other forever ago. So
Oh, how long were they married?
51 or 52 years, I think. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
a really long time.
Yeah, a really long time. Yep. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing the story of your parents and your family.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate all the work you're doing to share everyone's stories.
And that's the show, everyone. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. This show won't ever have a members area or episodes that you have to pay to listen to, but there are expenses to hosting a podcast, and if you'd like to help, you can support this show at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. The link is in the notes below. If you like this episode, please share the show. Share it with your friends, share it on your social media, and once you've done that, rate and review this podcast on your favorite listening platform. And then go rate it on Apple Podcast, because that's where most of our new listeners come from. Ratings and reviews are the main way this show finds new listeners. So please share the show. Until next time.